Aloha, I'm Representative Kimberly Pine, and thank you for joining us for this week's Better Government. We're very happy to present to you some of the things that the legislature is working on today, especially the Minority Caucus that I'm a member of, and I'm so proud to have two wonderful guests here today. We have my colleague, Representative Erin Johansson, and Director Beth Fukumoto, who's the head of our research office. Thank you so much for joining us.
Sure. Great to be here.
Well, we got 4 different areas that we're focusing on. We want to focus on job creation, better government accountability and transparency, which we haven't been seeing a lot lately. We want to focus on especially lowering the cost of living here in Hawaii so that local folks like us can stay and live in Hawaii for as long as we want, and of course protect our communities. So in terms of job creation, Beth, what do you think are some of the stronger bills that are coming out of this package?
Well, one of the big issues this year is that the unemployment tax rates were about to get raised. So one of the things that the Minority Caucus did was we chose to stop that increase so that it's not going to increase just yet. We do need some unemployment taxes to go into the fund so that people can draw unemployment when they're unemployed. But that increase was going to be too much for business. The average business pays about $600, and that was going to at least double, and it was just too much for businesses. So making sure that businesses can stay open was a huge priority.
So if there's a small mom and pop store and they have 1 employee, they're going to have to pay like $1,000?
Exactly. That's what it would have been. So we need this bill to pass in particular so that those increases don't take place.
And of course, Erin, we've heard from other leaders that they like this idea.
Yeah, I think there are different concepts floating around the legislature because there is some agreement that, you know, in the midst of what we hope is an economic recovery is not necessarily the best time to be potentially saddling all these small businesses that are just struggling to survive with additional costs. So, you know, I hope that sort of unanimity of purpose ends up leading to just a good solution ultimately for the people who just want to be able to, you know, operate their small business and the people who want to just work their job and earn a living.
There's also a bill to provide business tax incentives for those businesses that hire those that are unemployed.
Right.
Can one of you explain?
Sure. That bill in particular would essentially, the business would no longer have to pay that unemployment tax because they're hiring somebody off of the unemployment rolls. So if you're currently unemployed, a business could pick you up and not have to pay that tax, but then you're also not receiving unemployment. So it's actually a win for the state and for businesses.
I think that's a great idea. How about the PACE program? People keep asking, what does this create a clean energy PACE program in Hawaii? How does that deal with job creation legislation?
Well, Hawaii is uniquely situated to be able to build the clean energy industry, and PACE would allow people a cheaper way to finance or a better way to finance getting solar or something on their roof. And so that would obviously, it would increase the industry and it would build jobs.
And we also have a privatization of the Bureau of Conveyances to increase efficiency and stimulate private sector industries. Why is that such a big issue?
Well, we always want to streamline government, right, as Republicans.
But what are some of the, do you know some of the problems that people are having in the conveyance area? And is it just the delay of getting things approved?
Right now we actually have 2 different systems to do essentially what the Bureau of Conveyances does, and it's passing different land transactions back and forth. So we're trying to say, let's just make first of all, one system, and then maybe try to privatize it too, to make it go a little faster.
Now, Representative Johansson, just recently you introduced an incredible bill that will help a lot of your constituents and a lot of veterans in the state of Hawaii. Can you explain your Veterans Preference Bill and how that will help them?
Sure. I think I was proud, just like you, to be able to co-author a bill to retain a lot of our veteran talent and inject that talent into our local economy by offering a veterans preference with respect to state procurement and the state procurement bids. What our bill ends up basically doing is giving a foothold and a start to what is otherwise sometimes a difficult market to enter to a lot of our veterans who may want to remain here after they get out of service and open up their own business. You know, I know that's something near and dear to you as a military spouse. For me, it's something that I see a lot of in my particular district because I not only represent Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam, but a lot of my outlying areas that a lot of local folks are retired military who just decided to stay. And I think where Hawaii needs to be part of the trend, because it's an ongoing national trend that's happening in quite a few states, is how do we look at from active duty demobilization to effective transitioning into society, and not just transitioning, but also actively helping to build our economy. And I really think it's an exciting idea that is one of the most exciting parts of our Minority Caucus package.
Now, going on to improving government accountability and transparency, what are some of the bills that you think could help us to do that in the state of Hawaii?
Well, I think we've got quite a few, and some of them are very innovative. One that I really want to highlight, because I think it takes advantage of just existing infrastructure, so we're not having to build wholesale new government systems to do things, but is an annual audit that the auditor does, including special funds in that. We have got a ton of special funds, revolving funds, and to you and the general public, those are just arbitrary distinctions. But what it essentially means is there are a lot of different pots of money that the Hawaii state government is having to work on. And sometimes we don't always know what's in every pot, and we don't do the best job of effectively tracking how those pots of money are being used if they're not necessarily in the general fund. So what one of our bills will do is to make for regular assessment of those special funds, and what's more, to kind of help prod some of us and our colleagues in the legislature, if the legislative auditor, who's an independent office, recommends the collapse of some of these funds or the expiration of them because they're just not effective, then that would automatically happen. And I think what we've tried to do in this Minority Caucus package is look at just some common sense solutions. If something isn't working and it's not effective, it may have had its purposes 30 or 40 years ago, and it may have been working then, but we have to be realistic about effective use of taxpayer dollars. And this is one of them where there's already a system for assessment. We're just adding some of the other special funds that aren't maybe necessarily so easily tracked, adding some accountability there and more transparency. And I think in the end, proposals like that ultimately benefit the taxpayer, because at least they know where their money is going and whether it's being used effectively. In addition to that particular bill, we'd like to require the automatic disclosure of judicial nominees and those who are being considered, just as has been common practice by most of the recent governors. Informally, this just formalizes it and makes it a requirement. And we think that that's helpful for the public to know just who is being considered, given that judges have quite a bit of authority. We don't think knowing a little bit more of that information and making it formalized is such a bad thing.
And of course, we all remember, as you said, the governor got a lot of pushback on that, and the newspaper had to get a subpoena, and they were trying to get information about who those judiciary nominees were. And some people were saying, well, what's the big deal, Representative? Why do we need to know these things? And I tell them, well, the people that are going to be on the judiciary are going to be some of the most powerful people in the state. They're going to decide in the end what your rights are based on our laws. And so who's being considered for those positions is very important for all of us to know.
And unlike us, they're not up for approval every 2 or 4 years. So there's, I think, even more of a necessity to ensure that who you're getting for 20 to 30 years on the bench is ultimately going to be in the best interest of the people, because the people don't always have as much recourse as they do with elected officials.
Now we have a bill in our package that basically requires some online information and balance sheets of the Department of Education. I know the Department of Education is very near and dear to your heart. Why do you think that is so important for people to know?
Well, I think, I want to start off with a recognition that there are very good things happening at the school level, and there are good things happening within the department. It's very easy to cast with broad strokes, typically in the debate here in Hawaii, how we feel about the DOE. As Tu Moanalua alum, clearly I think it was an amazing place for us. But what I think that this can help the department to achieve is it can help shred some of maybe the skepticism about how some of the funds are used. They do get a large chunk of money from the state budget, and understandably so. I don't think anybody would dispute that education is one of the most worthwhile funding priorities of the state. But to help add to that transparency so people can again see within this large system, because it is one unified central system, where exactly the money is going is not necessarily a bad thing. And I think DOE is trying to move in this way. Through Race to the Top, they've established quite a few online systems, and they're really pursuing some initiatives with respect to best practices. And I think this is just part and parcel of that. But it would be good for the taxpayer just to be able to see, especially as most people are consumers, if you will, at the schools with their children or as parents.
And Beth, you've been a big fan of fiscal notes. That's also been in the package. And someone asked, what's fiscal notes? Can you explain a little bit what that really means in relation to what we do here in the legislature?
A fiscal note is basically a price tag on a piece of legislation so that people know exactly how much it's going to cost the state to implement. Right now we don't do that. We have bits and pieces. We'll get some testimony that will explain how much a piece of legislation costs, but we don't do that as a rule, and I think we really need to. Most states do have fiscal notes, and I think it'd help us keep the cost of living lower in Hawaii because we know how much things cost before we pass them.
And what a surprise that we would have to know how much things cost before we implement them. And I think most families would agree that that's what they do. And so you'd think this would be an easy thing to pass, but we've had a lot of resistance throughout the year, haven't we?
It's done we should point out, Kim, that it's done at the federal level. No bill passes Congress without the Congressional Budget Office scoring or adding a fiscal note, a price tag, to the bills. And I think that's, again, in this theme that we've tried to build the caucus package around, of just common sense solutions, things that make sense.
Why do you think this bill has such a hard time getting through? What do you think is the real reason?
I think it's not easy with the resources that the state has at its disposal to regularly come up with a price tag on the fly for legislation that, quite honestly, in all fairness, is very regularly and rapidly changing. Congress has an entire Congressional Budget Office just dedicated to scoring. Now, we may not necessarily have those resources available at our disposal, but I don't think it means that we shouldn't try and we shouldn't get to some reasonable accounting and financial impact of what we're going to pass. We need to continually sort of grapple with that and come to a better resolution.
So in terms of lowering the cost of living, oh my gosh, so many of my cousins are moving to Texas right now. That seems to be where all the job creation is. They have low taxes. Of course, unfortunately, Hawaii, we have some of the highest taxes in the nation, and so that's why the caucus, the minority caucus or group of us got together and said, we want to at least have a 2/3 vote in the legislature before any taxes increased. There have been numerous fees and tax increases in the past, and some of them have barely passed. And so this would be something that the people who want the tax increase would have to convince the majority, more than the majority, to pass. Why do you think that's important, to have more people involved in approving it?
Well, this lowering the cost of living is something that really is near and dear to all of us, because that is one of the most immediate things that our constituents see. It's not lost on us that a lot of people are struggling to get by, that a lot of you are just having a tough time making it in Hawaii, and that's true all across our districts. It's not specific to just one area. But I think then, with that knowledge, it's incumbent upon us to do something about it. And when we speak of taxes, I think the dialogue you often hear in the legislature is, people have needs, so let's tax and raise the revenues so we can pay for those needs. And that's certainly one way to do it. But I think there's another way that the argument doesn't always play out here, but is equally valid. The cost of living is so high and people have needs. Instead of just considering a tax increase to pay for those needs, what if we bring the needs down so that they still end up equalizing, and based on the cost of living and those needs, government doesn't necessarily have to overtax them to get that. But it can become this, we presume that sometimes the only way to fix a problem is to tax an increase, rather than considering that that is actually just exacerbating people's cost of living and ultimately sort of nullifying any aid or help that we as government might give them. I think we need to consider that paradigm shift. And that's what this bill and many of our other cost of living changes try to accomplish, is that we just can't keep piling on to our constituents and hope that in doing so we'll be able to fix the problem. Sometimes we need to look at the real root, and the real root is a very high cost of living, one of the highest in the nation. That's something we need to tackle because it's not getting any better.
So Beth, tell me about the streamlining of the Hawaii Housing Development Corporation to encourage private sector construction. So is it like a public-private partnership?
Right. Well, right now they need to approve a lot of the a lot of permits and types of things to get affordable housing projects moving. And we heard from developers who want to build affordable housing, things that people are going to be able to buy with their average salary. They are having trouble building this stuff because sometimes things get caught up in bureaucracy. So it was just removing some of that, making sure that we're still taking care of the environment and being responsible about building, but also making sure that we get those houses built so that our average families can afford to live here.
And of course, we had a very interesting thing, repeal the motor vehicle registration increases. And really what that came about, I think, in our caucus is when they were increasing the motor vehicle registration fee increases, what the sticking point for some of us was, and like, we want to continue to give money to the highway fund, but all we wanted to do was to amend the bill and say that any increases will actually go into the highway fund, but of course that was voted down, which makes no sense to us when they're giving speeches saying we're increasing this fee for the highway fund, but they didn't want to put it in writing. Right. So what's your folks' feeling about that?
You know, I think I'm like everybody else who has to drive over a pothole to get home. And so I am very sympathetic because it's not only taking a toll on our cars, but it's reducing ultimately our quality of life. And it's not helpful for commerce and for the economy. So there are good arguments that I completely support as to why we need to fix the roads. But I think, to your point, we have to know that, you know, if we're going to vote for the tax increase, that it's going to go to its specified purpose. And I don't think anybody disputes the validity of the purpose, but you know, that without those assurances, sometimes you just don't know. And you know, you and I know from being here at the legislature that there are lots of good things that we pass under good intent, but that's not necessarily always where the money ends up. Needs change, priorities shift, but you know, unfortunately, sometimes the taxpayer is left wondering, you know, what happened to my extra $25 at my vehicle registration fee increase, and what happened to all the extra dollars that came because of the vehicle weight tax increase, but I'm still going over the same pothole. And I think that's a reasonable question, and that's really just what's at the heart of you know, some of our lack of support this last time around.
And again, it goes around to your introductory theme of just common sense topics. And so I'm really proud of that this caucus really is recognizing that government really isn't that hard. It's really just using common sense, but as we know in this building, that doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes it's personalities and you killed my bill, and so hopefully our caucus will just stay steady and continue to be the voice of common sense. So Rep. Ching, of course, we have to mention Rep. Ching and her love for tackling this issue, and she wants to tackle diabetes. Any comments? And how does diabetes relate to lower the cost of living? Is it healthcare?
Yeah, it's definitely healthcare, and we spend a lot of money taking care of things that could have been prevented. And especially now, this new generation of people, we can start teaching them how to live healthy lifestyles so that we won't have that added burden later of increasing healthcare costs, because we could have stopped that. We could have helped them early on. So that's what Representative Ching is really trying to promote. And diabetes is one of the biggest preventable diseases in Hawaii.
You know, it strikes me as a lot of our time-honored, cherished adages really are rooted in common sense. And the whole, you know, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure is really the types of things that Representative Ching is pushing, and a lot of the things that we in the caucus support, because it's true. You know, and so not only are there fiscal impacts, but again, it just makes sense. You know, why wait till everybody has diabetes? Why not do what we can to incentivize, rather than necessarily just penalize, but incentivize a positive, healthy lifestyle?
And one of the things that we also are looking at is, of course, protecting our communities. We have a lot of bills in this area, and of course, in the top of people's minds today, at least at the Capitol, is the cybercrime legislation. And I'm just so proud of the legislature. Both Democrats and Republicans are finally recognizing that cybercrime is an issue that we are going to have to deal with in a very big way. More and more people are calling our offices who are victims of cybercrime. I just had another one the other day from a small business owner that said that her competitor put all these anonymous postings about her company, and she lost 90% of her business. And she couldn't figure out why, when she never had to advertise in the last 10 years because she always had a steady business. And so people are not just using the internet to steal things from people, which is happening every single day, or harass them, but they're actually using it as retaliatory techniques to destroy someone else's business. So what are some of the bills that stick out in your mind that you would like to mention?
Well, one of the things that I know this was very important, a lot of our internet service providers are out of state, so we needed to allow our judges locally to be able to go out of state to subpoena records. That was one of the biggest things that law enforcement here said is really getting in their way of prosecuting cyber criminals.
And of course, California has taken the lead on that issue. They have some of the biggest problems there in terms of cybercrime. I think 4 other states have introduced similar legislation, and when I did talk to the prosecutor's office and police, they said this is their biggest frustration, is someone is being victimized in Hawaii, but because we don't have this law, it doesn't give us authority to request the information. So they'll go to a judge and say, can you subpoena Facebook to give us this information of this person harassing this person, and they'll just kind of take their time because the judge basically will say, well, I don't have the authority to do that. So it's a very important bill that I think will protect people. Today we had a very interesting committee hearing, and we recognize that it was controversial. It's being introduced all across the nation. It's in Congress right now to require internet service providers to save information, and at a minimum IP addresses where we can catch criminals in the act. And many IP providers, internet providers, excuse me, do save this information up to 2 years, but not all of them do. Some erase it the next day, meaning that someone could harass you every day and we could never obtain the evidence because they erase it every day. And so we're really excited that the chair of the Economic Development Committee asked the internet service providers and the victims and the prosecutor's office and the police to come together to provide language that would help us to help these victims, because that's what it's really about, is helping these victims. And what are your thoughts about that, Aaron?
You know, I think it's high time. What you often hear from our neighbors and our members of our community, but also law enforcement, is that sometimes the criminals are just more sophisticated at getting ahead of the curve than our laws are with keeping up with them to prosecute them. And it's no more apparent than on the internet and with the web. You see this with cyberbullying, you see this with identity theft. And I think part of it is because as a society, it's a relatively new thing. It's not a crime that is well defined. Technology is always evolving. It's hard for people to catch up. But it doesn't mean that the effects aren't just as devastating. I'm thankful I didn't have to go to school in this environment of somebody potentially putting something up on the internet about me, when I was in middle school or high school and having to deal with the repercussions. There's just a lot that goes on, and I think part of why there's so much of it going on is the barrier is so low. The access point is so easy. Lots of people probably misappropriate someone's login name or their password, and then they just check their email. And it can start with innocent things like that, but that actually is a very slippery slope. That's a crime. Sometimes it's not, but it should be, depending on what state you're in. But it starts off with things that you feel like are harmless like that, and then all of a sudden, or you're posting a joke about someone, but that can easily turn into something malicious that becomes harassment or other identity theft.
And one thing that shocked me is a lot of law enforcement, and including our federal law enforcement, are saying, yeah, the crime syndicates, they don't even do the regular crime anymore because there's so much money to make through cybercrime that they're shifting, I guess, their business model to focusing on the net. And I think there's another important bill that clarifies our law. Unfortunately, in the early 2000s, the legislature amended the law that made it very difficult for the prosecutor's office to prosecute cybercrime because there's a word causing a crime without authorization. So that takes out all those people that says, I'm stranded in Australia, send money, and it's your friend, so you want to send it. So technically, you just gave authorization to give this person $2,000, but you were fooled. But the prosecutors can't prosecute things like that. And so we have just a minute left. Is there any last words you folks want to?
I just think, people have said over and over again that you just want some common sense solutions to these recurring problems, and that's what you have our commitment to do, to think critically and to propose some common sense ideas that will make your life better.
Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us for this edition of Better Government. As you see, government really doesn't need to be that difficult. It really can be simple, and so that's what we're here for you in the Minority Caucus, is to provide solutions that are not too hard to be implemented. And so we're going to continue to fight for you here at the state capitol. I want to thank Representative Aaron Johansson and Director Beth Fukumoto for joining us today. And as always, you can always contact us at the state capitol. We're looking forward to hearing from you, and we look forward to seeing you here at the state capitol because this place is your building, and we're looking to hear your voice. Mahalo and aloha.